figured, oh, it must have been a small plane, and what a strange thing to have happen. As soon as we heard about the second plane, I started to get pretty anxious, knowing that the Pennsylvania Task Force was going to be called out. The trip to New York was very surreal. It was dark, and we went through the Lincoln Tunnel in the wrong direction, and we saw just lines and lines and lines of ambulances, and everything was just very unreal. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, has 28 teams nationally, and these are urban search and rescue task forces that respond to nationally declared disasters. Generally, they're a full composite of 63 or more individuals that are involved in rescue and response. So they include a medical team, they include the search teams, which involves the dogs, usually 4 dogs with their handlers, and the rescue specialists that go in and move rocks to free people who may have been trapped in a disaster. So it was on the evening of the 12th. The sun was starting to set as we went in, and I remember we entered through what was the morgue. We made our way to World Financial Center, and that's where our base of operations was. And when we got there, they set up our whole group. They split us into 2, and so the first group went during the day, and the second group went during the night. So we had 12-hour shifts, which were more like 16-hour shifts. But because they were concerned that there would be less veterinary support available during the night, they put me on the night shift. The 4 dogs from Pennsylvania were under my direct care, but I also provided care for any of the dogs that were in the base of operations where we were. So any dog that needed to be looked at, I was able to do that right on ground zero. One of the really big things about 9/11 was it was the first time that the country got exposure to what search and rescue dogs are. They were front and center because they were the only visible sight of anything that could make you, not cry. The dogs that were responding and were at ground zero were knowing that something was going on. They were working. They knew that they had to work, and they wanted to work. They were generally pretty pumped up. And I think what happened is that at points it became, kind of non-productive for the dogs because they were trained to find live humans, and they weren't finding live humans. So they didn't get their reward. And so if you're going to play the slot machine for a while, you're going to give up playing after you don't win. We kept working and we kept working. And one of my jobs was to make sure that the dogs had some rest time. And I think with our team, we did really, really well, making sure that those dogs were out working, but then they had to come in and just have a break. So there were so many challenges. And as it evolved, it got much more organized, but it also became more disheartening because there was maybe there's still somebody that we could find, and maybe there's, maybe over here, maybe they could have survived here. And it was so depressing as each day kind of wore on and there was nobody. The emotions were running really, really high, and people were extremely distraught. They were stressed.
They were sad. There was so much emotion there. I noticed all of the first responders that were there were very somber. There was no light in anybody's eyes, but when a dog came by, there was just a crack, and people would actually smile. And so it turned out so that our dogs had two jobs when they were there, because people needed that touch point. They needed that hope that the dogs always brought. And one of my very favorite pictures was 3 firefighters sitting and just petting one of our dogs and smiling. And it just was so rare to see anybody smile, but you knew that dog was bringing them just the possibility that they could keep going. It really was a really important piece. So the impact of 9/11, it changed everybody's lives. We know that. I think what it did for me might have been a little different because, first of all, I felt like I was able to do my job while I was at 9/11. I was able to care for the dogs, whereas the people there to rescue weren't able to be successful. And that was just really hard. What it did is it planted a seed of how important these dogs are. It made me realize that these dogs are so valuable, but it also made me realize we don't know what we need to know. And there's also a lot of information or misinformation. When I was there, I remember hearing rumors that dogs were dying, and that wasn't the case. I heard rumors that after the Oklahoma City bombing that half of the dogs either died or had some horrible disease. I'm like, wow, if this is true, we have to know. And if it's not, we have to know. And so that really drove me, even as I was still there, we have to follow these dogs. We have to document what's happening. So the scientist in me was starting to formulate a plan. How do we evaluate these dogs? And as a result, when I got back, I was lucky enough to apply for a grant from the American Kennel Club Canine Health Foundation to follow the dogs. And so I led the longitudinal study of the health and behavior of those dogs that just ended after 15 years when we lost our very last dog this summer. I think the best thing that we found was that the dogs lived for a really long time. We had mostly Labs and Shepherds, although I think over 18 breeds involved, but on average they were living to be 12 and a half years old. And so for those breeds of dogs, that's good. That's really good. And what it's inspired is the opening of the Penn Vet Working Dog Center. We call it the legacy of 9/11. We opened on September 11th of 2012. All of the dogs in our program are named after dogs that served at 9/11. And what it's driving is, how can we look at these dogs? How can we train these dogs? What genetics can we learn about these dogs to help keep making these dogs better, healthier, more able to do this in the best way possible? What information can we have? And also, how can we have more of these dogs available? There's a real shortage of these dogs. I think at last count there were 285 certified dogs in the country, and that's just not enough. These are really incredible dogs. But you also have to realize most of the urban search and rescue dogs are owned by volunteers. So they put in incredible effort and their own money to train these dogs, to work with these dogs, to then respond when there's a national disaster. And they are the real heroes, and it's the team that makes up the heroes that really set them apart.